We're here at Kelly Tarleton's aquarium. He was a bit of a character, actually. He was a renowned diver and a famous treasure hunter. He actually got a lot of gold from wrecks around the coast. And one of his passions was he always wanted people to be able to experience what he saw when he was on a dive. So after a lot of tinkering and fiddling, he invented this amazing acrylic tunnel. Isn't it beautiful? And now it's in use all over the world. There is such a vast variety of underwater life, shapes, sizes, colours, fascinating. Some guys live near the top like this one, and others spend their time cruising the bottom. All very different and fulfilling different roles. A real reflection of the creative and infinite mind of the Creator, as we've been learning. An interesting thing about fish is that although we call all these guys fish, they are in fact a host of different species, each one completely and utterly unique. So what that means in practical terms is that these guys can't interbreed. So you'll never see a half shark and a half stingray. And that's a good thing. Because what would a half shark and a half stingray do?
Sting you and then bite you.
Sting you and bite you. Yeah. Look at that. Oh, look at those big kingfish. Man, aren't they cool? And it's the same with land animals. Each of these is a different species. They can't mate with each other. Each is gloriously different. There are a few exceptions, species that can interbreed. Mules are a cross between a horse and a donkey. Ligers are a much rarer cross between a lion and a tiger. And in both cases, species of the same genus. There are a handful of other similar examples. And here's where it gets a little bit interesting. We sometimes refer to ourselves humans as different races, the African race, the European race, and so on. But unlike these guys behind here, which are all different species, we are actually just one species, humans. And what a varied bunch we are. As humans, we're different colours, we speak different languages, we come from different cultures, and we belong to different nations. And unlike animals that we've been looking at, we're different. We're one genus, one species, one whole thing. Wherever we travel, whoever we're with, we can intermarry, we can breed, we can have children. Wherever we travel on this great world, we can have children because we're part of one whole thing, one species, humans. The United Nations exists because we recognise at times we need help to sort out our fights, take care of the needy, because, again, premise of it is that we're all one family, one entity, the human race. But this raises a whole number of questions. If we're all one race, one species, one type, where did all these differences come from? How come that although we are so much the same biologically, we can be so different culturally, ethnically, speaking different languages, and for that matter, holding to different religions? Interestingly enough, the Bible has a fascinating explanation for all of this. So let's go explore.
We're now in the Middle East, a place that can sometimes be complicated. And we ran up against one of those complications trying to bring you the next part of the story. We wanted to show you a pile of very, very ancient stones. Incredibly ancient, old building stones actually. We were trying to get to a place called Borsippa province in southern Iraq, near a town called Nasiriyah. And try as we might, eventually the government told us that we weren't allowed in. And with very good reason actually. There's been a whole pile of car bombings and different forms of violence and a lot of bloodshed, sadly, just over the last little while. And frankly, we're safer not going. So instead, here we are in Dubai, part of the United Arab Emirates, and a place famous for its architecture, stunning architecture. I mean, take a look at this one, for instance. What an incredible feat of engineering. This is a place that just loves to build. Listen to them, you can hear them still building in the background. Let me read you the vision behind this building. In Burj Khalifa, we see the triumph of Dubai's vision of attaining the seemingly impossible, and of the resolve of its leaders and people to work hand in hand in truly awe-inspiring projects. We had but one inspiration, the unflagging enthusiasm set in motion by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, who inspires us to reach for the stars. Well, given that we're here, why don't we go and have a look inside?
$95, $110, $115. The ancient building stones we wanted to show you are way over the end of the Persian Gulf. And funnily enough, they're from a tower too, from perhaps the oldest tower ever in the world. This picture was taken in Iraq in the province of Borsippa, and this rather curious structure behind these intrepid explorers is quite old. It's what remains of a ziggurat, a sort of a tower. Over the years, this tower has crumbled and been rebuilt a few times. The earliest stonework here goes back to earlier than 2000 BC. That's over 4,000 years ago. The ruins are an impressive 173 feet high, but they might have been as tall as 230 feet once. I know this appears to be in the middle of nowhere, but interestingly, Jewish and Arab traditions have both suggested that this might, only might, be the original Tower of Babel that the Bible talks about. Certainly this painting is rather fanciful, but the impression of a wide-based structure is probably correct.
Let's take a look at the Bible story found in Genesis chapter 11. At this stage of human history, there were no nations, there were no different ethnicities or cultures, not even different languages.
God was dealing with humanity as just one large extended family, one homogeneous mass. We read that God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth," in Genesis 9.
It was the same mandate God had given to Adam and Eve, to spread out, to fill the earth, and to take care of it. But what happened is when they came to a plain called Shinar, they stopped and settled down.
So what occurred was the complete opposite of what God had asked them to do. Look, here's how the Bible describes it. The whole world had one language and a common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Notice that? The world had one language and one common speech before they settled down. And things got worse. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth."
It mightn't seem like a problem, but there's a rather large issue lurking in here. Let's take a look. We've already seen that once sin entered the world, things spiraled downwards. First, Adam and Eve disobeyed God and their own relationships began to fall apart. And the tension is not only between Adam and Eve, you find it between their two boys. Their son Cain, driven by seething jealousy, murders his brother Abel, the first recorded murder in history. Then the story of Genesis moves to a man called Lamech, who was threatened by a young man, and in response, Lamech kills him. And then Lamech boasts to his family, "Watch out, if anyone ever crosses me, I will inflict revenge 77 times over." Talk about overkill. It'd be hard to get more vindictive than that, to pay back someone 77 times. Imagine living next door to him. Evil is running rampant. The writer of Genesis piles one story of evil on top of another, just to show humanity's bias towards sin. He wants to hammer the point home that humanity is going from bad to worse. It is this problem with evil that is the real cause of the Great Flood. The story records that the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6. Not once but twice the Bible says the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. God sends the great flood to halt their rebellion and descent into violence. The whole earth is flooded, all of humanity's gone, with one exception: Noah and his family. God has got them safe in the ark. We might have thought that hosing down the whole earth like this would have washed the slate clean, removed evil from the world. But it didn't. What the writer of Genesis is telling us is that humanity has a real problem. It doesn't matter how we say it, we're contaminated with sin. Just like one drop of poison would contaminate a whole drink. We lean towards the wrong, and it's become our default setting. Sure, not everyone is as bad as the next guy, but every one of us has that bias towards sin. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they were expelled. When wickedness multiplied in the ancient world, God sent the judgment of the flood. And when they built the Tower of Babel, well, let's dig into the story a bit deeper and see what happens. You see, while we might not think that the building of this tower was too big a deal, it actually showed just how far things had gone. Rather than simply rebelling against God as they had persistently done before, now they'd upped the ante. They'd decided to disregard him altogether. So they drew a line in the sand. We aren't moving from here. And they built a tower. The idea being that they would take over from God. They'd make their own rules and call their own shots. This impressive crystalline-looking pyramid was designed by the world-famous architect I.M. Pei. It was completed in 1989. This older portion of the Louvre started life in the 12th century under King Philip II and has been added to many times until it's become the magnificent building we see here. It opened as a museum in 1793 and it's exhibited some of the world's finest art since then. So much of the beautiful art that's displayed in this museum was created because the artists believed in God. They believed that God had created the world with all of its beauty and that He created humanity with the capacity to express that beauty. And so many artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo created their art as an act of worship to their creator God. And there's an appropriate sense of satisfaction, even pride, that comes from using those God-given abilities. But that's not what's happening with the building of the Tower of Babel. They're not saying, let's exalt God's name. They're saying, let's make a name for ourselves. Let's show God that we're not going to spread over the earth. We're going to build a great tower right here. And there's nothing and no one who can stop us, not even God. So God put a stop to it. At the Tower of Babel, God does a very interesting thing. In Genesis chapter 11, He says this: "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they won't understand each other." So God scattered them from there over all the earth and they stopped building the city. That's why it was called Babel, because there God confused the language of the whole world. As God scattered them, slowly but surely different languages developed, different nations emerged, and different ethnicities began to form. And from these diverse nations, slowly different cultures surfaced.
So although now we might have different skin colours, different ways of doing things, different ways of dressing, and no matter what race we come from, where we choose to live, how we choose to build our houses, the Bible says that we all come from one common stock, and that all these differences originate from the scattering that took place at the Tower of Babel.
But as they tried to do without God and walked out of Shinar to start their own brand new worlds, they couldn't get rid of religion. As history shows, we humans are incurably religious. The Bible says, of course we are, because the human race was made by God, created by God to know Him and be known by Him. In the garden, Adam and Eve had walked with Him and talked with Him, and the memory, the echo of that sweet relationship was not easily drowned out. So when Adam and Eve's descendants decided to turn their backs on God and to replace Him and went off to find their various places and develop their various cultures, these incurably religious people also developed their own religions and worshipped gods of their own making. That incurably religious instinct seemed to always express itself. One way or the other, we always end up worshipping something. And if it's not the Creator God, it's the gods we create, out of wood or stone or gold or money. We can even end up worshipping ourselves.
Now, if that's true, if the Bible's right on that fact, you would expect all religions to have started sometime after that, after the Tower of Babel. And funnily enough, that's what we find. This religion, Buddhism, major, huge religion, started in 624 BC, some 2,000 years after the Tower of Babel. This is the incredible Angkor Wat temple. It's one of the 7 man-made wonders of the world, deservedly so. The place is huge. It stretches for 1.5 kilometres one way and 1.3 kilometres the other. Incredible build. When it was built as a Hindu temple. It was converted to the newer religion of Buddhism not long after its completion. If Hinduism started before Buddhism, when did Hinduism begin? Well, when we trace the origins of Hinduism, we go back, a long way back, to the 2nd millennium BC, which makes Hinduism very old, one of the oldest religions on the planet. And then there's Islam. The religion of Islam came into being through Muhammad when he began teaching in the year 610 AD, aged 40.
That's almost 600 years after the establishment of Christianity. In religious terms, that's fairly recent. But now 1.9 billion followers of Muhammad are only outnumbered by the 2.3 billion followers of Jesus. Add up all the believers in Hinduism and Buddhism, Islam and Christianity, not to mention other smaller movements, and the picture is crystal clear. Humanity really is incurably religious.
And frankly, when we trace the development of all the world's religions, every single one of them began after Babel. So that one little event in a barren desert in the middle of southern Iraq has had effects that have rippled right around the globe and lasted for thousands of years. Who'd have thought? In this episode, we found that Babel was a place of huge significance. The Tower of Babel is where humanity upped the ante. They've been rebelling against God, but now decided that they didn't want or need Him. It was there at Babel that all our differences began. Different languages began there, and the result was the scattering of humanity across the world. Once scattered, over time these different people groups developed into different nations and cultures. Having abandoned God, they quickly created their own belief systems, their own gods, their own religions. But God cannot be dismissed that easily. Humanity was done with God, but God was not done with humanity. You see, God's loving pursuit of humanity is relentless. His love is also strategic. And we're going to discover in the next episode, God has a way of showing up unexpectedly, in His own time and in His own way, with a plan that affects us all.